Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here after such a intensive conference. We're here to talk about the future. Yeah. After 1.5 days of very intense discussion on localization, people real needs, new narratives, localization, new priorities, One Health, violence, localizations, it's time to talk about. No, we're not going to talk about the localization. We're going to try to project ourselves into the future. We might talk about localization, though, but anyway. So it's very important to, we looked very much into ourselves, but it's also important to take care of, to take into account what's around us. And we know that the situation is quite bleak, let's be honest, with some kind of orange-faced guy within the White House putting us into wars, but also into economical and energy crisis within a very difficult economical context with very, stretched budget and constrained budget, as well as a potential financial crisis around the corner. And let's add to that the climate, biodiversity crisis, the end of international law, the rise of populism, the fact that there is such a fear and hate of migrants, and then we have this AI waiting for us around the corner. So definitely we are facing many challenges. Definitely we need to change, but we don't need to change whatsoever. We need to change and stick to our values. We need to change and stick to our mission. And that's what we're here to talk about, and I'm very happy to trying to facilitate this very rich and diverse panel. Thank you so much for being there. I will ask everybody to present himself or herself, mostly herself, I guess, with the perspective of the discussion that we're going to have. So we're going to have like classical 1-hour panel discussion, and then we'll have a Q&A session. Who wants to start? Eilidh?
I almost failed at the first test. My name is Eilidh Kennedy. I'm one of the co-directors at IARAN, and I'm here today really to be a conduit for some of the findings that we've had through the Future of Aid 2040 project, which has been a very consultative process that we've been running over the last few years, and it's been my absolute immense privilege to be a facilitator of it. So I'm looking forward to sharing the challenging findings of that with you today.
Katharina?
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm happy to be here. My name is Katharina Spieß. I'm heading the Division for Crisis Management, Transitional Development Assistance and Infrastructure in Crises at the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. And with the Transitional Development Assistance, we as a development actor, I have to say, as coming from a development ministry, we have a financing instrument at hand that focuses specifically on the HDP nexus and on the crisis.
Thank you. Kinan?
Thank you very much. I'm Kinan Diab. I am the coordinator of the Syria Localization Lab, and I'm also here on behalf of my colleagues at Near Network. Hopefully I will be speaking on how localization looks for us in the global south, let's say, us in the field, and how it would look like for us in the future in an ideal world.
Krishna, we know you, but still introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Chris Gomez, and I'm from the Philippines. I'm a human rights lawyer turned futurist, and I'm a co-founder of Rogue Union, which is a union of rogues. And we train together to build new muscles for the chaotic times that we have. I liken myself to a personal trainer, except I don't work at the gym. I work with NGOs and leadership teams in our sector to build those futures muscles.
Thank you. Liz?
Hi, everyone. My name is Liz. I'm Brazilian. I'm coordinator at Aláfia Lab. It's a research and innovation lab based in Salvador, Bahia, in Brazil. And we do research and advocacy to understand and transform the relationships between communication, society, and internet. And I'm also a researcher at University of São Paulo and recently University of Dortmund too. And my role here is to try to localize the digital debate, the digitalization inside of these amazing debates that we are having since yesterday, and try to understand the digital as an actor in the crisis, in the conflicts, not just the place where the narratives circulate, but also an actor that shape and organize these narratives and these conflicts too. So really difficult questions today, but I'm excited to think about the future.
Very, very exciting. Thank you. Just a few words on me, just for the sake of the debate. So I'm head of Médecins du Monde Luxembourg. We're only active in Luxembourg, which is quite amazing. This morning we talk about the poorest country in the world, Sudan or South Sudan. I'm sorry if I'm confusing both countries. Luxembourg per capita is the richest country in the world, but still in our medical center last year we had more than 1,200 people having no access to health. But for a long time, we've been asking ourselves, should we go international or not? Yesterday, remember, Tana said, well, if we had to start from scratch, to restart from scratch, what should we do? Well, I guess MDM Luxembourg is in that situation. What should we do if we start from scratch today? So I'm, I guess, the first one interested by the conclusion of this debate. So I reckon on you to come up with nice solutions. We had, I guess, a great lunch, but after a day and a half of meetings, the energy is perhaps a bit lacking. So we're going to do some exercises. Gym exercises, like you were mentioning, but also neurological exercises. So it's very simple. When I say something, you just do the contrary. So if I say sit down, I'm standing up, okay? So we're going to do that like for 20 minutes, and then we go into the debate, okay? Then you'll be waking up. Okay, sit down. Lift your arm, your right arm, left one. Lift your left arm. Exactly. Sorry for me. Okay, put your right arm on your left shoulder. Okay, put your right knee under your left hand.
Yeah.
No, I can't.
A bit of balance as well. And then last but not least, you know, we all need money. So the money is deep in the ground. So let's collect the money deep in the ground. Let's go down. No. Finish. New exercise, sorry. My apologize, my bad. Okay, you take your real right arm and you get the money down, very down, very down. You collect as much as possible, and then you try to reach as much impact as possible. The highest impact possible, higher. One more time. Very down. And then let's go up, highest impact possible. Thank you very much. You can applaud yourself. Okay, now we all fit to start the discussion. Let's go with the first round of diagnosis. And let's start with Eilidh. Eilidh, you said a few words about your study and your research. And I guess the question is, we all know that resources are shrinking, needs are increasing, and there is some need for reform. Can we do those reforms? Or are we getting close to the limitations of who we are, what we are, and the system we're in?
Well, I think we very nearly reached my physical limits with that exercise. But I think the question on reform is a really important one. And we discussed that I love the way this is framed, because I think it opens up our own bias within this conversation, that we limit ourselves before we even begin. The idea that a fundamental reform of the system wouldn't change our structural limits is not something that we should consider. If we're truly serious about reform, and if we try and unpack it and really be creative with what kinds of solutions we're able to action and implement, then I think the limits of our system will change. That doesn't mean that we need to be growing and expanding the way we do business now, but we need to think very differently about how communities can be serviced. We need to acknowledge that some of that is none of our business and that they manage it themselves, and we interceding in that is going to create more problems than it solves. We need to think about how we can work differently, find different avenues of creativity and strength to deliver. So I think you're right that the challenges we face now by far outstrip the capacity of our system to be able to respond to it. But I think that means that what we need to do is to change the system. So we need to start doing that in earnest and not think of reform as something that just alters slightly what we have now, but think of reform as actually a fundamental restructure on which everything is on the table, and take it from there.
Okay, thank you. Kinan, I guess this afternoon you are our localization guy. From your perspective, how is localization playing out? Does it challenge power enough to go into the changes that Eilidh was mentioning?
Well, overall, the concept of localization has been uneven and contradicting sometimes. It is unique to talk about the Syrian context because we, until 2011, we did have the same starting point for civil society across areas of the country, and we were discussing how it was divided geopolitically. We didn't have an actual wall between parts of the country, but we did have different external factors, and it's usually said that, for example, in northwest Syria, we had the most advanced localization agenda. And usually this is refers to by, when talking about, for example, coordination, that Syrian actors not only had a role in clusters, for example, but they were also co-leading in some of them. We did have relatively a certain influence on deciding on allocations or priorities. But if you look at it with, zooming in a bit more, you will see that, for example, in coordination, we do have a seat at the table. Sometimes it's cosmetic, sometimes it's not, but it definitely has its limitations. And if you're not saying what you're supposed to be saying within the limitation, you're out, and God knows there are 10 more local actors who are more than happy to have that seat, right? And when we're talking about influencing, we want to think that we have influence on international actors or on donors. I think in reality, we just got smarter in knowing how to deal with them, what they are willing to work on with us and whatnot. So in our best case scenario, we just know how to navigate between different donors to work on it. However, still, when we're deciding on what we want to do, pretty much, we are still framed within the system itself. I didn't want to talk much about funding because I think, yesterday and today, a lot of people spoke about funding. But I don't think this is how you can measure things, because a lot of funding was received by local actors until it was not, it was limited. Then everyone switched back to their own survival. So I think it's the structure of how and who is controlling how the system works is what matters, and this is how we can measure localization in a sense.
Okay, we'll talk further about it with Katerina, I guess, but let's go to the digital world, Liz. What do you think? Do you think it's mirroring the current inequalities within our societies? Can we talk about digital colonialism as well, or this is such a negative view of it?
Yeah, I would like also to address what Kinan said, because who has the power build this? So we're not talking about the digital world, is the same. Who has the power to build this technology, to build these narratives, also shape how we in the Global South understand our world, how we can construct the views of a world. And that's the concept that you mentioned, the digital colonialism is not colonialism, all we know what is it for centuries, unfortunately. And the digital perspective is to understand that these inequalities come also to the digital world. So we can think this in a lot of perspectives. The digital colonialism we can see as an umbrella for a lot of inequalities, like infrastructure inequalities, when you can think about data centers and the predatory consumption of water to use them, and also the extraction of minerals to create technology also came from the global south countries. But we also can understand something that some authors think about epistemic injustice, is the fact that these technologies and all the rules that rule this digital world was built in the North global countries to their context, not to our context. And that's make that this digital space is ruled by these rules and does not connect with the context, the local context that we have. So we can see this in surveillance infrastructure, like we have some research, for example, in Brazil that shows that 90% of the prisons made by facial recognition in Brazil is from Black people. And there's other studies that show that when we are thinking about this type of technology, they have 100 times more chance to make mistakes when we are recognizing Black people. So that shows us how many people in Brazil or other countries are being arrested by mistakes of the technology. They were built like this. They are not built for people like us. They were built for other contexts. So we can face these inequalities in a lot of ways, and content moderation, and the lack of context in that. And yeah, that's some of the challenges that we have thinking about the digital world.
We'll talk about a way to address them in the future, don't worry. Katarina, we love donors, so thank you so much for being here already. I think it's very interesting to hear your perspective on this, overlapping crisis, on the fact that we see a shrinking civil society, we're a limited humanitarian space. So as a donor, how do you project yourself to deal with that, to make sure that indeed the money is well used with the purpose that you want to give to that money? If we can give her a microphone. Oh, you have one. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and very diverse opening, I have to say. So you said it already in your introduction. It's extremely challenging times. We see more and more overlapping crises. We see conflict. We see climate crisis. We see other types of crises. We see, as you said, the civil society being under pressure in many of those contexts. And at the same time, we see a sharp decline of funding on the humanitarian side and on the development side. So what does it mean for us, for a donor who tries to best bridge the gap between the humanitarian and development and to strengthen the resilience of those most affected by crises? So I think there are a couple of concerns. Obviously, a great concern is the role and the possibilities of local civil society to act. We need a strong civil society so that they are enabled, because they will find the solution with local authorities to the crisis concerned. And the second one, and this is something I'd like to, this is an open question, and I don't know whether we already have enough data about that. My understanding, or what I understood from the sharp decline of funding, is that it was mostly local civil society that was affected by this decrease of funding. So I'm concerned that at this point in time, we are losing those partners that we as development actors need to work with them to come up with more sustainable solutions, or to support them in finding more sustainable solutions. Maybe I leave it here.
You can go on. I mean, okay. Chris, we're talking about organization, but behind the organization, we do have people who are struggling with difficult times, bleak perspectives, questions about their jobs, and so on. Okay, what to do with it? How do we deal with it? How can we keep those people up to be imaginative for the future, for example?
Before I go into how, I'm going to give you a bit of neuroscience as to what happens to our brain and why it's hard to think about futures. So there's a long list of how we are wired as human beings, our cognitive biases that make it hard for us. But since I'm very kind to you, I'm going to give you only 2, so you don't get depressed. The first one is they did hundreds of scans of the human brain using an fMRI, where they asked people to think about their current selves. Those scanning them were focusing on one part of the brain called the medial prefrontal cortex. It's the center of the brain that has to do with the awareness of yourself and also empathy. Right? When they ask people to think about their current self, that part of the brain would light up, meaning they could recognize that, yes, that's me, and I have empathy for that person. But then when they ask the same people to think about their future selves, that part of the brain would power down. As if to say that we actually see our future selves as if they're strangers, as if they're people we don't necessarily have the same empathy for as our current selves. What that means in terms of decision making is, do I spend all my money now or do I save for retirement? Do I eat that extra bar of chocolate or do you only live once? At an organizational level, that then manifests, like what you said, we are the basic unit of organizations. Organizations make decisions without realizing that there's a big brain that powers that, both as humans and as organizations, that make decisions that benefit the short-term survival than the long-term flourishing or thriving of the organization. That's the first one. And I can give an example, but if we have time.
Go ahead, we have time. Go ahead.
How much time do you have? I was speaking with the head of an association of NGOs, mostly INGOs in a particular country that I shall not name. And I told the director, would you want to engage and support these organizations in thinking about future so you can be resilient? And she said, no. Respectfully, no, because there are funding cuts, they're letting go of people, there's emotional draining, they just don't have the time to think about the future, which is smart if you're thinking short term. But that's the reason why we keep coming back to this situation, because we never put ourselves in a situation where we can thrive and be resilient through different futures. So futures thinking is the first thing that goes out the window when people have no mental load, emotional bandwidth, and resources. That's the first bias. The second way that our brain is wired is what they call normalcy bias. You know the saying, keep calm and carry on? That's hardwired in us. Apparently, when we're faced with disruption, our brain tells us that, you know what, it might get bad, but it won't necessarily get that bad. Or even if it gets that bad, it might not necessarily happen to me. It turns out that during 9/11, it took people in the Twin Towers an average of 30 minutes to evacuate. Some people even finished their activities and shut down their computers while the buildings were on fire. And this has nothing to do with the intelligence of those people. These are very smart, good people. But because of how we're wired, it helps us cope with disruptions, and there are disruptions in life every day. Great for coping with slightly disruptive stuff, but when we're faced with truly disruptive stuff, we don't react as we should. And that's why, even if we've been talking about the decline of the aid system for 2 decades, why were we still shocked when things happened the last couple of years? Exactly, hallelujah. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, anyone has anything to add for this first round, because we have more time than foreseen? Katharina, on resilience, you want to say something maybe? That's one of your priorities, and then we talk about the second round.
I'm happy. So I think there are different, resilience is a huge word, but I think you pointed at something, and this is something that is also of concern for us. We all know that humanitarian crises can be averted, can be somehow addressed, and can be overcome if we invest in the resilience of the communities, of the people concerned. This means we need to start beforehand, we need to work within the acute crisis, and we need to work in a longer time. Here I come back to what I said in the beginning. It's for us, it's vital then to have like local civil society, local actors, local authorities with whom we can work before, within, and then after the crisis. And I think this is something, again, where we are faced as a donor, as funding is declining. How do we maintain this system, I think, where we also find very good examples where it has worked, and we as development actors, like we start early in a crisis, we try to come up not only with anticipatory action, humanitarian anticipatory action, but let's say social security systems and so on. How will we be able to maintain that? And when specific structures are at this point in time so much under stress. And also, maybe also one point, and this is not only a donor, but also speaking here for or facing a public, for example, in Germany, that is more and more critical towards this type of support, because resilience is something where you don't see immediate results. It takes time until you see the results. Once you have the results, they are excellent. So I can give you an example of Niger, where we have had a huge program invested in the resilience of the communities, and then when the next shock hit those precise communities, they were not in need of humanitarian assistance. So, I mean, there was resilience, but it takes time. So also to tell the story to the German public is also something that is very important, where we also need your help, by the way.
Thank you so much. Well, you can keep your microphone to go on to round two, which is a bit like, okay, we started from the diagnosis, we're going farther into projecting ourselves, but we know we need to change. We know the system also has to change, and the question is, how do we do that? And maybe, Katerina, you as a donor, how can you trigger deeper transformation? What kind of tools do you have to trigger transformation and the system in general within the INGO that you are trying to support? How would you look at it?
That is a very huge question, isn't it?
We have the whole afternoon, don't worry. I just talked to Mariam, it's okay.
No, okay. So how do we trigger? So what kind of transformation do we need? This is
and how do you, as a donor, push for this transformation in the way you fund projects and organizations?
Sure. Let me think for 1 second.
For sure.
Then I find the perfect answer to it. No, I will start with some of the things that we have already started doing. We ask INGOs to work even more closely with local NGOs, or to work in a consortium. So what do we need? We need, I think, more cooperation amongst those actors that are addressing humanitarian crisis. I think we all know, and there is, as you said, there is a competition between INGOs and UNs and also local NGOs. There's sometimes overlap, there's also sometimes mission creeping and so on. This is something, maybe we definitely had a role in that as donor. Sorry. Okay, we had a role in that as donor, but what we need to, and where we closely look at, is to really sit down with our partners and say, okay, how can you work together to really bring at the table what is your unique somehow experience, so that we can address a crisis in a more holistic way. So this is the first thing. We expect cooperation, and also cooperation like then with local NGOs. German funding law is made in a manner that we cannot, it's very difficult for us to fund local NGOs directly, so we always need an intermediary, and we have different possibilities to do so. However, what we can do is to bring them indirectly more to the table. So this is the first point. The second point, as I said, we try, and this is, I think, I find it very challenging at this point in time. We strive at funding partners in a way that they are in a position to address a crisis, like from a short-term intervention to a longer-term intervention, so that in order to break the silo that the system has been working in because of different reasons. So really breaking the silo. I think I leave it here.
Well, that's already very, very interesting. Kinan, well, Katarina just talked about local organization. You've been through crisis and wars and so forth. So what should localization look like in conflict setting? How the transfer of power could operate and could become a reality? And are there red lines about this transfer of power?
First of all, I think you did put a lot of pressure on Katarina, honestly.
Yeah.
And
sorry about
this is
that,
usually
Katarina.
this is how we treat the system. But I kind of think that we are treating the system in a sense that, you know, it's like Atlas holding the world and it's going to fall apart if we don't have the reform or whatnot. And I'm sorry to burst that bubble, but the reality is that, you know, this is not the only system, right? Organic alternatives not only can exist, but already exist in a lot of contexts. We do have sometimes regional or locally led pool funds. It happens. It is not less ethical. It's not less, you know, committed to the humanitarian principles. It does provide better end results for the people we're trying to serve. And if I'm going to, like, you know, just address the elephant in the room, there's, especially when you're talking about the conflict, and usually what happens with conflicts is that the public sector, that is usually the main service provider, but also the body that provides the governance, the policy making, is lacking either the ability or the will. And guess what? It happens in all contexts. And this is where we end up with one system deciding that we are the only legitimate body that can decide priorities, decide how allocations should go. And again, it shifts back to what I was mentioning about power. And unless we break this cycle of who has this power, I don't think it is going to pretty much end. And different systems refer to like at least I can think of 3 different sections of it. So with funding, I already mentioned that locally led pool funds could be a solution for that. But also with coordination itself. We always treat coordination in a standardized way. These are the clusters, these are the existing, you know, we just have standardized boxes that we have to work within. But the reality says no. And again, since I was talking about Syria, we do have the previously regime-controlled areas had a civil society that was not even exposed to the system at all. And they did manage within their own capacity, without even being exposed to the system or actually polluted by the system, to find a way. So maybe what it takes is a shock that, you know, you just were referring to by certain politicians, that will break this current system rather than reform it, and we will see that, no, we are actually able to create our own, in a sense. Because this current system is all pro-localization until you hit the areas of power, and then it stops.
So what to do with it? How to deal with it?
Recognize that there are other systems in place, and, you know, just have accept that they overlap, and just accept it for what it is. I think I'll save the rest of the solutions for the final round.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, Liz, so the vision you told us about is quite bleak. As a society, what can we ask from governments, big techs and so forth to get a better future regarding digitalization?
A lot of things that we can demand for. In my first intervention, I was trying to localizate that the digital harms affect different people in different levels. And I think when you are thinking about how we can do it better, it also needs to understand the context levels. We not have one answer for all the problems, and that's a lot of problems that I could not have time for address this here. But just to say that's not one path and one way. It always depends of the context and any country has these needs. But one thing that I think that's common and we can address like globally is understand that we need a regulation based on human rights to digital platforms, to AI, to all the digital environment, because these platforms, they work with the market values and to profit, and not are counting on human rights to understand and to create their own policies, own rules. So this is the one path that I think we need to address. And also, I would like to emphasize that it's not just copy and paste regulations. Here in Europe, we have a strong regulation, the Digital Services Act is really important, and also AI Act, but we cannot just copy and paste to our countries because we have different needs to address. It's important to have inspiration. It's important to also open paths to address and demand some parts, some things, but we cannot just copy and paste. So I think that's one thing that I would like to address. Also, I think that we need to demand for platform accountability. Yesterday we talked about a lot of NGOs accountability and donors accountability, and we also need to understand the digital accountability. What their platforms and the big techs are doing with our data, what is it my photo that I posted in Brazil is being used to train AI models, and someone in other country will generate a photo of me? I don't know. So we don't have this accountability, not just to digital and social media platforms, but also when you're thinking about workers and digital platforms like Uber. In Brazil, we have iFood and other delivery platforms. So we need to also address the accountability of all these systems to understand how we can do a better thing. And just to finish, I would like also to understand and address the needs for investment in local contexts, investments in local languages, in culture and political specificities, because as I said before, it's important to address the context, the local context in content moderation, in how these technologies are built, and also just matching what was said before about the long funding, because to address some of these problems, we need to also think and build new infrastructure, public infrastructure, digital infrastructure, and this demands also long fundings, not just project fundings, to address these things. And I will keep it here, and after I can bring some examples too.
Thanks. Eilidh, back to you. Your work addresses the new role of INGO. Let's be blunt. What should INGO stop doing?
I rarely have trouble being blunt, so I'll take you up on that offer. I think, as Chris said, thinking about the future is a hard thing. So we can all acknowledge that. But I don't think anyone who started a job in the aid industry thought they were going to do something easy. So let's do the hard thing. I think what we need fundamentally is a mindset shift, and I don't need to explain this myself because colleagues have been doing it for the last few days. Nanette mentioned in the session on narratives the fact that we need to challenge assumptions. Often when these conversations happen, there are assumptions made about how much capacity is on the ground, about what exists there. We make assumptions, we don't really check. We also, I think, all live with an inner assumption that we do it better. It's quite human to have that, but let's be honest, that also colors our decision-making. Adelina mentioned in her talk about the fact that we are not the center of the system. Kinan just mentioned it. What do we need most? In a mindset, it's humility, but also what a gift that is. Sometimes we have these conversations about localization, and it feels like the conversation is, if you don't show up to work tomorrow, the world is gonna collapse. No, that's not the way this works. There are so many different organizations on the ground every day delivering so much. If we leave, would there be a vacuum? Sure, for a little while. But you know what would grow very quickly is a way to respond to that. If we leave and we take all our money with us, is that a bigger problem? Potentially. But this is a question that we need to resolve, and if we are uncomfortable with that, then let's be a little bit uncomfortable. Nadine also talked in her opening speeches about how being a local organization can feel like climbing up a mountain when people are throwing rocks down at you. We should acknowledge that on our worst days, we are some of those people who are throwing rocks. We're making it harder for local organizations sometimes to do the work that they do, to be at the tables where they need to be. We are stepping in and taking money where we should be trying to give it straight to them. So we need to acknowledge that and try and not be defensive about it. And we also need to think about the fact that in our mindset, we need to reverse how we're operating and not think so much about ourselves and our own institutional survival, but how can we use our privilege to try and shelter other people from the rocks falling upon them? How can we be trying to change the system to make life easier for the people who are on the ground and delivering in a way that we say we want to support? So we need to be more humble. We need to be less defensive. And we also need to start thinking beyond the challenges, accept that it's a hard thing, and find a way forward. Some things we need to stop doing. The first one is excuses. I think, we had an opening speech where Dr. Eilidh was talking about how normal wasn't good, how Donald Trump coming was not like the start of the negative trends and political environment in which we find ourselves. We were not on a path towards realizing a localized aid system 5 years ago. We didn't do this when the going was good. So now to say we're not doing it because it's got harder is frankly not true. It's just another excuse as to why this isn't being implemented. Is it harder now? Potentially. But again, it's just harder now. It doesn't mean we stop doing it. It just means we need to find more creative ways to be implementing it. We need to have more courage with what the consequences are going to be and still move forward. We can't have this as an excuse where we say, now it's harder. We didn't do it when it was easy, and now we have to do it when it's hard. That is a collective failing we need to sit with. But again, not use it as an excuse not to make progress into where we're going. I have 3 of these, by the way, so we're going to keep going on this.
Go on. Be blunt.
I think the fact of the matter is we also need to change our narrative. We talked a lot about narratives yesterday, and I found it very inspiring. When we talk about localization, at least behind closed doors, it's often talked about as a challenge, a problem. There are things in the way. We're not incentivized to do it. Donors put conditions on money, we can't possibly spend it. If we're the ones who pull out, God knows what's going to happen next, right? This is often the way we talk about localization. There isn't enough capacity. We need to build capacity in the following areas. Now we've done that. It needs to be in the rest of these areas. We can't possibly leave without building yet more capacity. This goes on and on and on. And it's the narrative because we like to sit in this miasma of where we are. But enough. It's a hard thing. We have to do it and move on. We need to be more solutions focused. Another thing we need to stop doing, which is very true of our present time, is shrinking, not changing. In a response to the cutbacks in funding and the funding cliff, what we're seeing is a lot of organizations who are retracting, reducing, losing staff, but they're doing so in a way that maintains their structures, their systems, and their decision-making. We're getting smaller. Many of them aren't saying it out loud, but they're doing it while they're maintaining the capacity to rebuild. They are under what I think is a false assumption that at some point the money is coming back. It's coming back at scale. So the most important thing is to stay as a stable system so that you can grow again. This is fundamentally at odds with what we all think that we're supposed to be doing. Everyone says they're committed to localization, so let's actually be committed to that and understand that having smaller systems while maintaining the same decision-making and power structures does not deliver on transformation. There is no way that it's going to, and we shouldn't be pretending it will, because that's just going to waste more of our time rather than actually making progress. There are other things we should stop doing, but that I think is fundamentally the critical point, which is why we're not making any progress. Because it's not an easy thing to do. It comes at huge personal consequences. It's very hard to be talking about this in an environment where we know people are losing their jobs, and we know people have mortgages to pay, they have aging parents, young children. We have lots of individual and personal obligations which make this a hard conversation. But the other thing we have to stop doing, again, is centering ourselves within this conversation. If you joined this sector, you didn't do so for your own benefit exclusively. We understand that this is a career, many people reap their rewards from it, but it's not supposed to be your reason for getting up in the morning. I also think we need to have a little bit more faith in ourselves. We can do this, and we can do it better. So let's just stop talking about it as though we've already failed. What can we influence? A lot, I think. You can hold space for the pain that this causes within our communities and our very close space. But again, we can't stay in that space. You have to move beyond it. Change happens, it needs to happen at every level of international organizations. Boards, leadership, middle management, implementing staff. No one is immune from this conversation. And what we're finding more and more is that in these conversations, everyone points in a different direction, right? The board is like, totally agreed, but like, I can't sell it any lower down. Everyone lower down is like, oh my God, I'd love to, but the board says no. And so you get into this circular, again, challenge of the narrative, where everyone is just focused on what you can't do rather than what you can do. We need champions at every level, and everyone can exert influence. We also
last one.
Last point. Oh, you really promised me I could go on and on.
Pick a point.
Right. I think the last point is to say we need to change our mindsets and think about every decision as if localization is already a reality. We need to stop talking about not if localization happens, but how you're making it happen today in every single decision you're taking. We need to talk about it as not a when we get around to doing localization, but a now. This is immediately. So not if, but how, not when, but now. And we need to use that to look for loopholes everywhere we can to be able to strive against the incentive system that's set up to overcome the challenges that we have. And we need to start getting our dopamine hits from doing the right thing rather than talking about it. Someone said to me, and this really is my last point, that what INGOs really need to do is either do localization or not have so many panels on it. And I think that's really a good point. So.
That was blunt. Thank you so much. Chris, okay, she said the red line is what we should stop be doing if we want to project ourselves. You're futurist. How can future back thinking help us?
So I'm going to start by first describing what future back thinking is, or futures thinking. Because people often come to me and say, Chris, I can't predict the future. I live in a volatile context. I operate in conflict zones or in a regime that changes their minds. So what's the point of futures thinking? But futures thinking is not about predicting that one future that will happen. What it does is, that's why you notice I say futures, plural, not one. What you do is you think radically about different futures, not caring whether is this realistic or not, no. Think about different futures and then work backwards from there to then make decisions today on what capabilities and changes in strategy, behavior, and organizational culture you need to make so you can thrive in any one of those futures or none of them. So you detach yourself from that obsession in forecasting or predicting, because no matter how different futures are, you will find common threads of strategic questions. Now, I'm going to describe to you two specific ways that it can work. The first one, so there was a simulation that was done by a futurist named Jane McGonigal with 20,000 people over 20 days, where they were asked to pre-live a future scenario. The scenario was a global respiratory pandemic originating in China. This was 10 years before COVID. Over days, she asked these 20,000 people to pretend as if they were living in that future. Day 1, go out in public wearing a mask. Day 2, work from home. Day 3, refrain from social events. All of the things that we ended up doing during COVID 10 years later. Can you imagine how those 20,000 people fared when COVID actually happened? While the rest of us, including our governments, were reeling from shock and despair and walking around like headless chickens, these people, they're like, oh yeah, I know exactly what to do. I've lived through this reality, bring it on. So instead of panic and despair like how we feel now, they operated with that calm confidence. You take the shock out of the equation, and what remains is strategic confidence, and they were more able to be of help to others. So at an individual or at organizational level, it's so helpful. But because they did it in a social setting, by the way, we do these simulations all the time at Rogue Union, and I just did it with the crew at Doctors of the World, MDM, on Monday, so you've heard this, you can close your ears. But if you do it in a social setting, meaning people actually write journals every day as they experience that future, and they share those journals with each other. We do it in an online platform at Rogue Union, so you can read the journal entries of the experiences of people who are very different from you, living through the same reality. And what that does is you see different angles to the same future with a diversity of experiences that you can't bring by yourself. And then when you pull up, you see patterns of behavior within a group of people. In that pandemic simulation, they found out that women had a hard time balancing working from home and homeschooling their kids 10 years before COVID. They found out that people would break quarantine rules for religious worship. They found out that misinformation and disinformation was very prevalent. These are policy issues that you could determine by simulating a scenario long before that scenario happens, or even if it never happens. That's one way that futures thinking is really, really useful, even from an emotional standpoint. The second one, there's this thing called future benchmarking. We know what benchmarking is, or maybe not. I'm going to describe it, which is when you want to decide what to do, and INGOs especially, some of them do it, you compare yourself with the best practices of your peers, especially the best ones in the field. I actually know an INGO, they're really good. They did that. They were trying to future-proof their organization, so they interviewed the heads of their peer INGOs. And then they found out that, oh yeah, we don't do plans more than 3 years or 2 years because there's no point. But futures thinking is not telling you to come up with a 10-year action plan. That's ridiculous. You come up with your 1-year action plan, but based on a long-term trajectory. But since everyone else they benchmark to are behaving this way, they thought, okay, then we don't need to plan for more than 3 years. They had that false sense of certainty or confidence. They were benchmarking to the best practices of today. 2 weeks later, that sector basically lost a huge chunk of their funding when the government announced we're going to pull out billions of euros from civil society. No one was spared. But future benchmarking is you're not asking what is the best practice today, you're asking what are the best practices of the leader of my field 20 years from now, and then work backwards from there today. When we change, the kinds of transformations that Eilidh has been talking about, they're hard. You get your staff and your board and your partners through a deep, painful, emotional process. And then by the time you finish that transformation, you've spent 5 years only to find out that by the time you get there, you need to transform again. So it's actually not helping you to keep benchmarking to what's good today. Benchmark to the future and work backwards from there.
Very interesting. Thank you. Final round, imagination. Okay, Eilidh, you did quite a blunt vision of the sector. So what kind of future, different scenarios precisely do you see for the INGO, humanitarian INGO sector?
Well, I think what we're seeing at the moment, candidly, is a bit of a split. There are INGOs who are turning and investing much more in true and genuine local leadership. And by that, to be very clear, because I've only just realized recently that this isn't clear, by local leadership, we mean subordinating our own power and decision-making to those who are from the context and know it better and work in it every day and can tell us what's more important. It means accepting that we don't have a vote in how their money is spent. We can help them spend it if it's useful to them. We can ask them these questions, but it shouldn't be our decision what happens next. It has to be the communities who need the support. They're the ones who should tell us what to do. So I think having that outlook and that scenario is important. So that's one. We see some organizations moving in that direction. We see other organizations who are turning, not necessarily the other way, but to think about reform in a way which I would describe really as being within the structural limits of what we look at today, to look a little bit more like the UN and UN OCHA and how that is coming out now in terms of the way that money is being spent and distributed. And what we're finding there is in those conversations, the focus is much more on equitable decision-making. Now, both of these things sound good, right? Like locally led decision-making, equitable systems. But I think when you look beneath the surface, what do we mean by equitable decision-making? We mean that everyone around a table has an equal vote. Why do we get an equal vote in what happens somewhere else? Because when we often have these conversations, what's unsaid is that what that essentially looks like is the international community get an equal vote with local organizations, with communities in areas of intervention. So in Syria, in Palestine, in the Philippines, in other places. Are we really conceiving of the fact that if it was truly equal, they would have a decision in how we operate here? No, right? That's not realistically what we're talking about, which means that this is equality that goes one way. It means that everyone has a voice at international level, and international actors have a voice, but only where they choose to. And I think these things for a long time have been lumped together. There are things that often are talked about in the same way, but I think even for me, I'm only just realizing now quite how different those endpoints are. So the scenarios of where INGOs are going, I think it's going to be complicated. I think it's going to be mixed. I don't think we're all heading in the same direction. And I think what we really need to do is focus on what Chris was saying. You know, the future context, it's going to change. It looks differently in different regions. Even today, we're not going to have one monolithic context in which we're all operating. It's always different. So what is a principle that we can abide by, which I think would create a future for international organizations where they truly add value, is to understand and accept that our value should only be defined by the communities to whom we say we serve. If they're the ones defining our value and what our role looks like, then it's going to look different in every context, and we need to be prepared for that kind of adaptability. We can't control that level of future, but we can influence how we operate in those futures. And by using that, I think that's what's important. We are very afraid of that question about whether or not people see value in what we do. I think if we ask them, do you want us or do you just want our money? We may not like the answer to that question. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, we kind of know that's the question we should be asking. And we should be okay with it if they say they just want the money, that they're going to lead without us. That is supposed to be what we were all working towards, that we were working ourselves out of a job. So I think we need to be open to that in every future.
Kinan, money or us? Microphone.
Don't do that to him on stage.
Well, it's kind of easy to go after Eilidh because I will just mansplain what she just said. Honestly, these are my points, right? But seriously, now, in all of our talks, we discussed the system, we discussed the change in power, we discussed all of these details. And sometimes while trying to do this, we forgot, ultimately why we're doing this. And honestly, the uncle in Al-Mawasi or the old lady in Idlib, they don't care less about this jargon. They don't care if you call it humanitarian development, whatever you want to call it, and God knows they don't care much for those acronyms we always use. So if you are building a system, right? I'm imagining my system here. I will imagine that it is accountable not to donors, honestly, because this is what we always care about. This is what we're scared of, right? Over compliance and whatnot. But actually to the people we are claiming that you are trying to serve, like plain and simple. And it goes all the way from the smallest grassroots initiative all the way to donors. And with this mindset, we can think on how this will happen. If we do this in the core of our thinking, we will have the local and national actors collecting agency, because we always claim to have agency over our communities, but sometimes we lose our compass. So once we have that, we can start building a system that revolves around those local and national actors. Not contextualized, it should be built by us, for us, in a sense. And then you can give us your money. But mainly this type of system I can think of. The involvement of international actors should not be considered a standard, but if there's a need for it, then fine, there's a need for it, but it should be kind of only bound. Otherwise, it's just, this Sisyphean process that never ends. You just, pulling the rock to the top of the mountain, then you're doing it again. And it's really important, again, I said it once, twice, this is the third time, but there are existing mechanisms in place. People don't wait for the UN. They don't wait, I'm sorry, but they don't wait for the white man to come over and start telling us how to do things. God knows we in Syria have, we have a certain million number of people, but they are the same, number of engineers, political analysts, experts, and everything. So we do have the technical capacity, honestly. Sometimes the organizational capacity we miss, but this can usually be covered within a workshop or a training most. Understanding context and why we can do certain things a certain way and not. It took some INGOs 14 years working in our context, and they still don't understand it. And this is how they had to have us in clusters to begin with, right? And I'm just, being as blunt as I can. And speaking of coordination mechanisms, what happens is, again, they are just contextualized rather than led by us. There are a lot of terms that we really had to learn just to get the money. Like, we can call it, like, I can call it helping an old lady, helping, the women in our communities, but, a lot of jargon and a lot of boxes that were imposed on us that we had to learn, unlearn, relearn, rephrase just to get the money. It's just never ending. So if such a system exists, it should be built by us, and we should be the ones running it, having the power in it, exactly as you mentioned.
Okay. Katharina, I was going to ask you, what are the guidelines for the future for donor? But maybe you would like to react to what those previous speakers have said, and indeed tell us a bit about how you project yourself for the future in terms of guidelines, as you feel. I don't want to trap you.
Yeah, I'm happy to. There's a lot of food for thought in that, and I won't comment on how the INGO scene is transforming itself. I think this is the job of the INGOs doing it themselves. But what I'd like to re-emphasize. I think this is the overall goal, isn't it? That it should be a locally led development. It should be decided by the people in the local communities, and it's not something there is to a certain extent an accountability towards us as a donor, because we use taxpayers' money, so we are accountable ourselves also to ensure that the taxpayers' money is used in a way that is in line with internationally agreed standards. So therefore, I think the future, and I saw that the question that originally was asked to me is like the framework, like the SDGs, still serves as a guiding anchor? And I would say, yes, of course. Because what are the Sustainable Development Goals? It's an internationally agreed framework where we all say this is where we as all states want to reach at. It's a transformative agenda that does not only apply to the global south or to the global north, it applies to all of us. So in a way, it meant, and within this framework, we then should on eye to eye, how do you say, on an equal level, then discuss how can we achieve this Sustainable Development Goals jointly. And within that, and in addition to that, you mentioned human rights. I mean, human rights are then at the center of the individual activity, which means also that the state is accountable towards its citizens, but also in an international framework. There's an accountability. Maybe just saying this, I just want to re-emphasize that I do think that this framework is really an adequate framework also for international cooperation, because it puts it into a perspective that it concerns all of us in different manners, but on an equal level. And then coming back, breaking it down to the locally led development, yes. And therefore, what do I expect then as a donor from INGOs? I want to see their exit strategy. I want to see how do you exit in the situation where you are at one point in time maybe needed and dearly needed. I mean, we all know those contexts where it's crucial for the people on the ground that INGOs move in. But then we also need to understand better, and I think this is everybody's. We need an exit strategy, and we need to see that from the INGOs. Maybe to react to that quickly.
Thank you so much. Back to digital world. You've seen a lot of alternative initiatives in your studies, act of resistance, act of doing things differently. Maybe you could expose them now in the conclusion.
Yeah, sure. I think that when we are thinking about future, and this exercise is really important after 1 day and a half of Congress, just to step down and think about different possibilities that we have and different paths that we can go. And when we are talking about the digital perspective, I would like to address this, that sometimes the big techs and the digital platforms, they have the power to kill our imagination, to think different perspectives. It seems like the technology is the only path to go. But I would like to refuse this. And it's not, we cannot think that technology is neutral, but also is not inevitable. They cannot make their own future that we have. So I think that the different futures that we are thinking about, and thinking about the humanitarian perspective. I'm not from the humanitarian field, I'm like the outsider here, but I would like to imagine that all our future in different fields also depends on the decisions that we are making today about different perspectives, and one of them is the technology. The technology that we are building today is also going to shape our future. So we have a lot of good examples. As I don't want to leave you here just with the bad perspectives of big tech power in the field, in the digital rights field. We are building beautiful things. Community networks in Brazil have indigenous community networks they created to communicate themselves without going through the big tech. We have in Argentina, for example, different platform cooperatives to create new perspectives beyond digital platforms from workers. We also are building in civil society organizations that work with the digital rights, the possibility of think together different future. Aláfia Lab is part of the Global South Alliance, and we are building together different things how we can imagine in different countries from Global South, what the AI that we want to create, what this perspective that we want to build together. So also, I was invited to come and talk about the digital perspective, but also going in some of the themes that you brought about funding. Of course, digital rights is not outside the funding cuts and everything. And one thing that makes us stronger is work collective. Yesterday we had a really powerful panel about networks that we are building in Colombia and in other countries. And it's also something that we are building together. Networks that we can reinforce and make power to make that our demands, our thoughts to be listened. So, and in the end, we are trying to understand how we can create digital sovereignty in our countries to not depend for the global north technologies only. We are not refusing them, of course. We need them. We work with that, but we also need to create different perspectives to build our own future too. So in Aláfia Lab, we had website that just covered disinformation, environmental, so we try to understand and explain the phenomenon. And we also did a report there showing these community networks that are building in Brazil that brings technology and connective to outside communities. And one of the interviews said that today the technologies are used to enrich billionaires, but we also can think that we can create different conditions of life. And that's what we are trying to create. And just to finish, Aláfia, it's a name in Yoruba. It's an African language, and it means, there's a lot of meanings, but one of them is good paths, open paths, and we're really trying to think how we can create open paths for technology to create a better future.
Thank you so much. Chris, you have 5 minutes to explain how to set ourselves up to face those future different challenges.
I'm going to give you two tips.
Fingers in the nose, right?
2 tips, practical tips. Let's end with practical tips. The first one is, so in futures thinking, we say that it varies depending on the futures you're talking to, but I'm going to go with, there are 5 areas of reality that all interact to produce reality as we know it. There's social, technological, environmental, economic, and political. The acronym is easy, it's STEEP, S-T-E-E-P. As humans, we are wired to have blind spots. We're strong in 1 or 2 areas, and we don't pay attention to some. Including with MDM, just on Monday, I asked them to score themselves, the same way I've done this in many groups, how strong they are in each area. And by far, across the board in the social impact sector, we have a favorite blind spot, and that's technology. And we're saying that tech bros are taking over our lives and determining how the world should be, and yet we don't pay attention to that to be able to opine and have agency in making things not inevitable. A tip is, how do you build habits? Ask yourself. Me, I don't build habits by reading a long report. That's just me. I don't know you. I don't build habits by reading a long journal article on technology. I like reading magazines. So what I did 8 years ago when I found out that it was my blind spot, I picked the most fun magazine I would be happy to read when I'm tired, or especially when I'm tired. And I built that habit, and all it took me was 10 minutes a week. Now sometimes less, but I'm still doing it 8 years later. So ask yourself, number 1, what is my blind spot? That's awareness. And then how do I build habits and approach it like you're building a new habit or building a new muscle at the gym? The second one is, so that's in terms of like area of reality or disciplinary area. The second one is, how many of you right now are doing organizational strategy or recently finished one or about to embark in one, thinking about strategy? Yes. So I work with organizations on strategy a lot, and we tend to focus on things like, right now, everyone's talking about closing civil society space. Well, we've been talking about that for the last 15 years. The aid cuts, and those are what we call in futures thinking as trends. These are the mainstream things that are really affecting our reality. From a futures point of view, I always say working or basing your strategy just on trends is like cooking curry with one ingredient. It's important, but it's very insufficient. There are other spicy ingredients you need to put in your curry. One of them that I would highlight, that I would give a tip on, is what we call signals of change. Signals of change are not the mainstream phenomena. There's still small pockets of reality in the fringes, a new research, an anecdote you heard in a party. They're not mainstream, they're still peripheral, but if they mainstream, they can alter reality as we know it. It's really the definition of being ahead of the curve. We all like talking about the same things, reading the same reports, sharing the same news articles, and that's why we're very good at trends. And that's why we're shocked when something that was in the fringes 10 years ago suddenly mainstreams. Or even if they don't mainstream, they help us ask hard questions. As an example, a signal of change that I keep thinking about is, I was in a recent foresight process with other organizations. We were talking about fundamental rights. And everyone in the room was talking about human rights, very important. I mean, I'm a human rights lawyer. And then I shared a signal where a cloud forest in Ecuador is being petitioned to have authorship of a song, a legal personality to be recognized the author of a song. Because the song was recorded, they say, not in the forest, but with the forest. It follows a long precedent of dolphins having legal rights, rivers having legal rights, basically the more than human world having rights. And yet most people still talk only about, very important, human rights. But imagine a world where rights belong not just to humans, but also to the more than human world. That will alter our thinking about who is entitled to things, where nature is not just an object of preservation, but a subject of rights. That's still not mainstream, it's still a signal. Do we pay attention to signals? So, spot those signals. It can be done, it's a practice, it doesn't take a lot. If you want to get started, come to me after. I have a list of really cool things you can read while or podcasts, or check out Rogue Union. I sound like I'm advertising, but that's what we do. There are courses there where you can learn these muscles. I even take people to the forest, like leaders in social impact, so we can learn these muscles for a week. But even if you don't, so forget about Rogue Union, come to me if you want to, Chris, I just really want to learn this. Finally, as an organization, we need to make space, and not just permission, but encourage our staff and our leadership and our board to learn these habits. And leaders often think it costs a lot of money. Oh, now I have to hire a consultant like me to do a whole foresight process, 10 workshops. No. I actually tell them, don't do that. Start with the existing spaces. Find out about the culture of your organization, the natural spaces your team gravitates towards, and just spend 5 minutes in a staff meeting per month where people bring one signal of change each. If you keep doing that, people will never unlearn that skill. So that when you need to make hard decisions at the high level, it's not the leadership team or the board telling them we have to change. It comes from everywhere saying, of course we have to change.
Of course we have to change. Thank you so much for this very rich panel. I think you can give them an applause. So my boss just told me that we have time for 3 questions. Sorry about that, but I think the conversation was too rich. So we have someone with a microphone in the room. Yeah, lady there. So we take the 3 questions and then we answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for very interesting discussion and reflections. My name is Adelina Kamal and I'm from Indonesia. Talking about the futures, I find that many of us even are not living in the present, but still stuck in the past. So how can those of us who are still stuck in the past, not living in the present, engaging with the futures? That's number 1. And one of the things, and sorry to say this here, but this is the panel where when the term Global South and Global North were mentioned more than the other panels. And I'm guilty of that as well. But I feel like the term Global South and Global North is inheritance from the past. Right? It was coined in the 1960s and 70s. And now we are living in the present when many countries in the Global South are not poorer than the Global North. I mean, you talk about Indonesia, we're going to be the 4th largest economy in the world in the next decades, right? So it is not applicable. So how can, my question to all, but perhaps to Krishna, because you're the lead futurist, what would be other term that we humanitarians can use when it comes to Global South and Global North? I feel like it keeps dividing us. Because if we work in humanitarian field, you want to recenter humanity, and within it is justice and equity. But if we keep dividing ourselves into this, the North and the West, how can we actually move into the future where we have shared responsibility and solidarity?
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, other questions? A lady over there and a man over there. We have 3 questions, I'm sorry. Only the right side of the room.
Yes, thank you. My question will be for Katarina. So you told us very clearly what you expect from INGO as a donor. As an INGO worker, I will tell you very clearly what I expect from a donor: to make partnerships, with local actors easier. It's to lighten, the burden of compliance and administrative requirements that donors have. And usually, when I have the opportunity to ask that question to a donor, I usually get the same reaction. It's either a very long silence or an answer that goes like, well, the law is the law. So I wanted to ask you, are you considering at BM, since you're encouraging your INGO partners to partner more with the local actors, which is something I think we should all encourage, are you at BMZ also making, the compliance and administrative rules easier as well? Thank you.
Thank you. And the last one was over there. Yeah. Thank you for the microphone bearer to run around.
Hi, first of all, my name is Laura Victoria Alzate Rodriguez from Fundación Jalú. I actually had a similar comment because considering, for example, the name of the panel, Organizational Change, Systemic Limits, and Shared Responsibility, it's important to acknowledge as well that these systemic changes can be also addressed from the more higher levels of the system, and that includes donors, especially when addressing the new roles that INGOs can also have, and how could from these states incentivize these changes. And a particular question that I also have is how these, not exactly conditions, but frameworks of SDGs, for example, considered as universal frameworks and standards, can dialogue with acknowledging a pluriverse of knowledge in different parts of the world, considering also the discourses around localization. Thank you.
Okay, we have not much time to answer. Chris, you start with stuck in the past, especially when we talk about Global South and Global North. Any idea to change the narrative?
This is central to what we think of. Is it Adelina? Because I've been asking this question. I used to do futures thinking very differently in the past. And I always ask this question. We come up with all these fancy scenarios. When I look back at the organizations and the teams I worked with, did they produce an actual change in their behavior and culture or even strategy? Mostly no. So I've been problematizing this for the last several years. There are many reasons to it. There's power, but one of the key, again, I'm going back to the neuroscience and the psychology of it. One of the key reasons I found is in our sector, it's not for everyone, but for most, true for me, the way we do things, even our own projects, our initiatives, these are not just intellectual undertakings that we do for work. They're closely tied to our sense of self, We're very invested in them. And asking someone to change the way they work, the way they think, let go of their projects or their INGO is like asking them to grieve for their old selves. It's a question of identity for most. Change is very hard, painful, and it's deeply personal. The answer we found, Rogue Union, is how do we create a process that holds that vulnerability and pain and humanity? I'm a lawyer who had to learn contemplative practices. When we do our retreats and our trainings, we spend so much time giving people rest. We start not earlier than 10 a.m. We go for walks in the forest. We finish at 5. We don't do working lunches. I'm sorry to the Americans in the room. And we really ask ourselves, how do you open people with low mental and emotional bandwidth who are feeling under siege so they can be open to grieving for their old selves? It's a long conversation, but it's a recognition that it's not because people don't want to be stuck in the past. It's just that it's a deeply psychological thing. On your question of global north, global south, it's interesting. We talk about it and debate about it all the time in our team. My co-founder at Rogue Union, Ishtar, she's South African. She's a product of apartheid. She's a feminist activist. And we keep asking ourselves, do we still keep using global north, global south? We haven't come to a conclusion. This is a live debate, as many of you know. Just go to LinkedIn. There are long debates there. Some are calling for, let's call it global majority because, well, look at Indonesia, right? I wouldn't want to give the answer because at the end of the day, my answer to it is, it's like people should be able to claim the term that they identify with, where they feel this is not a product of colonialism or racism that was imposed on me, which I guess means maybe we'll not have one language. But I do recognize the complexity of it and that words carry meaning, concepts carry bias, and deep discrimination.
Thank you. Eilidh, one suggestion?
I think just to say, to build on what Chris says, I mean, I absolutely agree on the global south, global north. I think the language is super problematic, but we struggle to find an alternative way to describe it. And I think at least when we find ourselves in a position of needing to use that language, it's because to find a way to call out the inequality within the system, we need a language to be able to name one group or one area and to try and describe that. And that just seems at the moment to be the most common vernacular for people to use and understand that concept. But I agree, it's hugely problematic in many ways. I just wanted to say one thing on top of what Chris says about the emotional side. Everything she said is absolutely true. It's super personal. It's a really big challenge. But I think what we also lack, and it comes to this point about narrative, is we look towards the past because we're more comfortable looking backwards. But it's also because I think we, as a community, have not really rallied around a vision for the future that excites us. When we talk about localization, as I said, we often talk about it like it's a problem, like it's a challenge, it's super difficult. We haven't really embraced the fact that it's a huge opportunity. Like, imagine if we pulled it off. How amazing would that be? If in 10 years' time, we're not having this conversation, if we really actually created a system that it's locally led, that we really had a system where there was local decision-making structure, where money flows that way, where it's more sustainable, where we're tapping sort of local resourcing base, where we're not having the same conversation again and again and again. That would be incredible. And we need to be more excited about that vision. Is it going to be painful to get there? Yes. Is it going to be painful for a lot of people? Yes. But the fact of the matter is, that is where I think we all want to get to. So let's get excited about it and start trying to talk about it in a positive way.
Katarina, compliance, donors, locally
I
led.
find it a pity to end with that because I think my two previous speakers were much more looking forward, because also I think my answer might be a bit frustrating. No, we are not going to lower compliance and accountability. We need to be compliant and accountable as well. Yet where we do have to look into jointly is how can we lighten the administrative burden? So how do we make it easier? And how can we best do that jointly, knowing that the system is under stress and knowing that the money needs to be used for other things as well? Sorry, I'm being very short.
And what about systemic change that you guys could incentivize? we talked about it a
How
little
much
bit.
time do we have for that?
2 minutes, I'm afraid.
I think, yeah, this is why, and you might have noticed that for me, the Sustainable Development Goals are really something. This is part of the systemic change. I mean, it's more on a broader picture, but I do think it's important to re-emphasize the importance of the Sustainable Development Goals and also of the Agenda 2030. That is like a transformative agenda. What does it then mean in terms of system change within the humanitarian system, within the system, how to address crises, I think is yet another discussion. And I would take it as a follow-on question on how we can further incentivize that. And we'd be very interested in your view on that as well. We have ideas on that, but I think it's a joint discussion that we have to discuss with all stakeholders, by the way, because as we have just seen, there are very different views on that as well. It's the local perspective, which I think is the most important. It's the INGOs, it's other actors as well.
Thank you so much. Okay, very last one. My boss just left, so I can... Oh, she's there. Oh, so
Thank you so much.
The very last one.
Yes. Also a question for you. So I was wondering, because you said that...
Microphone.
That the INGOs need to be accountable to the German taxpayers. And I was wondering, is maybe in the future of humanitarianism also... is maybe Germany as one of the biggest countries of exports of weapons, is that also part of the future of humanitarianism? Maybe how is Germany to be held accountable to, for example, Syria?
I'm afraid it's for you, Katharina. Do you have a no, microphone's not working anymore, right?
No, I think these are questions to be discussed.
Sure.
But I'm coming here from the Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, and I'm looking, and we are talking about the humanitarian system, and that there are other questions where accountability matters, obviously.
Well, I think we can stop here. We stay seated because just right after us leaving the stage, we will have the wrapping session with Katri and Anne. And thank you so much for your attention. I thought it was a very interesting discussion. And thank you again to the panelists. Last applause for them. Thank you so much.